Hello everyone, it's day 21 and today we're gonna go through the documentation for GSAP on the Webflow page. This documentation is made by Webflow about how to use the GSAP, the newly native GSAP. And we're gonna go through it because I think we need it. We need this deep knowledge to know. We have to study this documentation before we dive deeper into the GSAP animations. And let's go export this documentation. So this is the first iteration of interactions with GSAP. Our team is still actively working on improvements and new capabilities. At this time, Webflow defaults to classic interactions. Yeah, that's why we have to change when we are making an interaction, we have to change it to the newly GSAP interactions. The classic interactions are still the basic. To try interactions with GSAP, switch versions using the drop-down at the bottom. The interactions panel. Okay. Interactions with GSAP let you create smooth, performant, reusable animations directly on Webflow Visual Canvas without extra tools or plugins. As you build, you can visualize the flow of your interactions on a horizontal timeline and fine-tune controls like timing and sequencing to create a motion-rich experience on your site. Yeah, it's amazing. What's an interaction? Interactions are sequences built with 4 key parts: triggers, targets, actions, and animations. Okay, let's now see what trigger type is. Trigger type is click, hover, page load, etc. Yeah, the trigger target, the element or elements the trigger acts upon. Action, a reaction to a trigger. Action target, the element or elements that are affected by the action. And the animation, a type of action where properties change over time. Okay, when a site visitor interacts with your site, a trigger detects that event and starts an interaction. The interaction performs one or more actions, which affect one or more targets. Some actions are simple, like adding or removing classes or modifying an element's style or attributes, and others involve visually complex timed changes, like the animations. As you build interactions in the interactions panel, they appear on the timeline, a visual tool that sequences multiple actions and animations. Okay, this is important. GSAP interactions aren't currently compatible with shared libraries. Interactions applied to components on a source site won't run on components installed on another site. If you need interactions to work across sites, use classic interactions instead. Okay? How to create an interaction. Go to the interactions panel. On the canvas, choose the element you want to trigger the interaction or the element you want to animate. Click New Interaction. Choose your trigger type. Choose an action. Set trigger target and action target settings as needed. Drag blocks on the timeline to adjust timing, duration, and order. Use the playhead to scrub and preview the sequence. Review your site and interact with the page to confirm everything behaves as expected. Okay, it's simple. We already did some animation, so we did all that. Setting, interaction scope. The interaction scope limits where targets are found Provide precise control over which elements get animated. Simple scopes. No additional selector needed. All matching elements, default, this is the default, targets every element on the page that matches your selector. Children, only targets direct children of the matching elements. Siblings, targets elements that share the same parent. Parent, targets the parent element. Next sibling, targets the immediately following sibling. Previous sibling, targets the immediately preceding sibling. Okay, advanced scopes requires an additional selector. Descendants, all descendants that match a selector you specify. Ancestors, all ancestors that match a selector you specify. First descendant, the first descendant matching your selector. First ancestor, the first ancestor matching your selector. Yeah, this requires an additional selector. You have to type the CSS class of the element you want to target. I already did that in one of my previous videos when we were targeting a descendant element into the parent. It's easy. There is an example here. You have a button with class .trigger button inside a card. When clicked, you want to animate. The card's title, card title, use scope first sensor with selector card. All icons inside the card target .icon with scope descendants and selector .card. The next card in the list target .card with scope next sibling. Yeah, I think it's very explaining every interaction scope we can see here. Not really that hard, I get it. Let's continue. Interaction example. Show a popover when a button is clicked. Trigger click. Action toggle. Area attributes plus toggle visibility. And we target the button and popover. Okay. How to delete an interaction. To delete an existing interaction, go to the interaction panel. Hover over the interaction you would like to delete. Click the three dots icon. Click delete. This removes all instances of the interaction across your site. Okay, I already did that. It's very easy. Conditional playback. In an interaction settings, conditional playback gives you control over where and when interactions play. Okay. Page scoping. Page scoping allows you to decide on which pages the interactions runs. Okay. Breakpoints. You can set up interactions according to breakpoints by using conditional playback. This follows the same breakpoint rules as styling. Interactions will cascade down to smaller breakpoints. To choose the breakpoint on which you want to set the interaction, click the breakpoint icon at the top middle or bottom right of the canvas. If you set an interaction to not animate on a mobile breakpoint and the user resizes their screen to make it smaller, the animation will stop playing as soon as the media query matches the breakpoint size. Okay, this is amazing. We can make the animations responsive and choose to not show some animations on the smaller screens, and they cascade like on the default from the bigger screens to the smaller. Okay, nice. Incorporating accessible animations. Certain web animations and flashing content can negatively affect the health and well-being of people with vestibular and photosensitivity disorders. This can include triggering motion sickness and seizures. As you design your site, it's best to think about accessibility from the start and create safe animations that don't cause harm from unexpected or excessive movement or flashing. Okay. Best practices for accessible animations. Ensure base animations adhere to WCAG guidelines without requiring users to set a motion preference on their device. Ensure animations respect the user's motion preference by setting conditional playback. Set the interaction to no animation or skip to end, depending whether you want users to see the interaction's initial state or the end state. Okay, accessibility is important. Troubleshooting interaction issues. Interactions may not work as expected on published sites if your site incorporates custom code. Custom code is an advanced modification that may conflict with Webflow's underlying functionality. Our support team is unable to provide direct help with custom code setup or troubleshooting, as these topics all fall outside the scope of our customer support policy. If you run into issues with custom code, please let us know on the Webflow forum, where the entire Webflow community, staff included, can provide additional help and resources. Additionally, interactions with GSAP will not work on shared library components. Okay, and here is a link to the Webflow way, where they can tell us the best practices and conventions when using GSAP. I already read this article. So let's continue with the documentation about the GSAP. Webflow interactions with GSAP glossary. I think this is important. Let's see everything there is in the GSAP. Action, a response to a trigger that changes something on your page. Actions can be instant, like toggling a class, or animated over time, like fading in an element. Okay, this is an action. Action preset, a saved, reusable action configuration that can be applied when adding new actions to the timeline. Okay, animation, a type of action that changes properties, position, opacity, scale, etc. over a specified duration, creating smooth visual transitions. Okay, this is the animation. Auto alpha, I like this a lot. A special visibility property that combines opacity and visibility settings. When set to 0, the element becomes both transparent and hidden from screen readers. It's very easy to make animations when something disappears and then appears. Very useful. Block, a visual representation of an action on the timeline. Each block shows the duration and timing of an animation. Click, the clicks on which you want the trigger to fire. Controls the playback of the animation. Controls scrub on scroll. Runs through the animation in an exact timing ratio with the scroll trigger. It will also play the animation backwards when someone scrolls up in the viewport. You can adjust the smoothing, which determines how long it takes for the action to catch up to the browser scroll. Okay. Controls trigger actions. Lets you have more precise control over how the animation plays in response to the target's element's position. Custom event. A trigger that responds to custom JavaScript events, enabling integration with other scripts or third-party tools. Okay, delay. Time in seconds before the animation starts after being triggered. Duration, how long an animation takes to complete, measured in seconds or milliseconds. Easing, we're gonna use easing a lot. Also the duration and delay. The auto alpha. And what is the easing? Controls the acceleration and decoration of an animation. This is sometimes referred to as the feel of an animation. Common types include linear, constant speed, power from 1 to 4, varying degrees of ease in out, back, overshoots the settles, bounces at the end, elastic, springs back and forth, expo, exponential acceleration, deceleration, circular motion, circular motion easing, okay, and determines the placement of the target element in relation to the viewport, where the element is when the trigger stops firing. Determines the placement of the target element in relation to the viewport and where that element is when the trigger stops firing. Okay? GSAP, the professional grade JavaScript animation library that powers IX3, providing high performance animations with extensive features. Okay? Interaction, a complete animation sequence that connects triggers with actions. An interaction defines what happens when a user or system event occurs. Okay? Interpolation, the calculation of intermediate values between keyframes to create smooth transitions. Jump, a timeline control that moves the playhead to a specific time position instantly. Whoop, see repeat. Yeah. Loop is basically a repeat. Masking, split text. In text animations, defines which text elements, chars, words or lines remain visible while others animate. Okay, origin, transform origin. The point around which transformations, rotation, scale occur can be set to corners, center, or custom positions. Okay, this is very important. We're gonna use it a lot. The origin. Playhead, the visual indicator on the timeline showing the current time position, can be dragged to scrub through animations. Yeah, gonna use the playhead a lot. Position, timeline position, where an action starts on the timeline. In Webflow, interactions with GSAP position are all absolute. Okay. Property, an an animatable characteristic of an element, opacity, position, scale, rotation, color. Yeah, that's what we basically are doing with the animations. We change the properties of the element. Repeat, number of times an animation plays. Reverse, place an animation backwards from its current position. Scope, limits where targets are found, providing precise control over which elements get animated. Okay. Simple scopes, no additional selector needed. We already went through that. Let's go again. This is very important, the scope. If we understand the scope, we will have a perfect control when we are selecting an element. I still have a little bit of problems with this. Knowing the scope of your project will and how to use the scope will make it so much easier to not make mistakes when selecting an element you want to animate. So simple scopes, no additional selector needed. All matching elements, default, targets every element on the page that matches your selector. Children, only targets direct children of the matching elements. Siblings, targets elements that share the same parent. Parent, targets the parent element. Next sibling, targets the immediately following sibling. Previous sibling, targets the immediately preceding sibling. Advanced scopes requires an additional selector. Descendants, all descendants that match a selector you specify. Ancestors, all ancestors that match a selector you specify. First descendant, the first descendant matching your selector. First ancestor, the first ancestor matching your selector. And okay, we already saw this example before. Scroll triggers, scroll based animations that include start end positions, define scroll boundaries, scrubbing, animation progress tied to scroll position, pinning, fix elements during scroll, toggle actions, trigger different actions or on enter leave. Okay, scrub, manual dragging of the timeline, playhead to preview animations. Okay, show scroll markers, visually displays where the scroll trigger begins and ends on the canvas. Speed, the speed of the animation multiplied by the number chosen. For example, if you set speed to 2, your animation will move at 2x speed. Split text breaks text into animatable pieces. Letters, individual characters. Words, individual words. Lines, individual lines of text. Stagger applies animations to multiple elements with a delay between each, creating cascading effect. Yeah, we're gonna use stagger a lot. I already tried it. It's easy. Start determines the placement of the target element in relation to the viewport and where the element is when the trigger fires. Okay, target the elements that receive an action or trigger. Timeline, the visual interface showing the sequence and timing of actions. Time markers show seconds, milliseconds. Tracks organize actions by element or purpose. Blocks represent individual animations. Playhead shows current time and allows scrubbing. Controls, play, pause, and speed controls. Track, a horizontal row in the timeline that organizes related animation blocks. Transform, properties that change an element's position, size, or orientation. Move X, Y, position changes, scale, size changes, rotate, orientation changes, skew, slanting, distortion. We're gonna use the transform a lot. Trigger, an event that starts an interaction. Click, mouse click or tap, hover, mouse enter leave, scroll, scroll based events, load, page load, custom, JavaScript events. Okay. Trigger snippet, your custom code creating the trigger. Tween, short for in between, a single animation that transitions from one state to another. Type, over, whether you want the trigger to fire when the mouse enters or leaves the element. Visibility, see out to alpha. Okay. Yo-yo, repeat back and forth, makes an animation play forward and backwards on each repetition, creating a back and forth effect. Okay. That was useful to know about all the important properties in the native GSAP and options. Okay, is there something else we need to know? Let's see the interactions timeline. Everything is updated 3 months ago when the GSAP came live to Webflow. So it's very up-to-date tutorial and documentation, super useful. The timeline is a visual container for actions that lets you precisely manage complex sequences. The timeline appears at the bottom of the canvas when you design an interaction in the interactions panel. You can click Show Timeline to view the full timeline or click the height arrow to collapse it. The timeline only appears when you build interactions with GSAP. It isn't available for previous version of Webflow interactions, so it's not available for the classic interactions. We can see the timeline only when we build interactions with GSAP. Anatomy of the timeline. As you design an interaction, the timeline populates individual animations as blocks and actions as tracks that organize them by element or purpose. The timeline organizes tracks chronologically with time markers. Timeline organizes tracks chronologically with time markers, so you can visualize all the actions in the interaction as a sequence. Click and drag the tracks to rearrange them, or click and drag their left to right edges to adjust their length. Yeah, it's very easy to use the timeline. I'm actually surprised. I never used timelines before. So it was fun and it was easy. You can preview your interaction at any point with play, pause, reverse, loop, and speed playback controls. The playhead shows the current time and lets you script through actions and animations. Timeline settings. To adjust timeline settings, click the back button next to your action's name. Under settings, you can choose whether you want your animation to repeat, infinite loop, or yo-yo. Okay. Note, you can use control in place of command and alt in place of option on Windows devices. You can use the following keyboard shortcuts when the timeline is open. It's very cool to know the shortcuts. I'm trying to use them and to learn them. Because I feel like when you know the shortcuts of something, you feel better about it and like connected with it in some way. So it's very useful. It needs a little bit of dedication, but when you want to master something, to really learn something, you should be dedicated. And Webflow is a software that really need a lot of learning, and knowing the shortcuts will definitely help along the way. It's a step forward. So let's see the shortcuts real quick. I still don't know the shortcuts. The timeline. Delete the current selected action, backspace or delete. Okay, I know this. Enable hand tool, which you can use to drag the timeline to scroll horizontally. You can do this with H. Zoom timeline in, option plus equal, zoom timeline out, option plus minus, move selected action forward by 10 ms, option plus dot, and so on, guys. You can see the, the shortcuts here. Let's see if there's something interesting. This documentation, interaction timeline, actions and animations. Let's go. This is pretty important. Actions are responses to a trigger and have targets they act upon. For instance, actions can include playing an animation, modifying a target style or structure. You can configure actions to run in sequence or in parallel. Some actions are instant, like adding a class, while others are animated on a timeline. How to create an action? When you start creating an interaction, choosing an action is one of the first things you do. Go to the interaction panel, click new interaction, choose your trigger type, choose either a custom action or one of the predefined actions in the model window. Customize your trigger targets and action targets as needed. Click the animation's name at the top of the panel and customize it. Yeah, you have always do this because I sometimes forget. I think this should be the first step. It's very important to name your animations and don't forget. Set the animated properties associated with your chosen action. If you would like to add multiple actions to an animation, click the back icon next to your action's name. Then click the plus icon and choose your new action. Then customize it as needed. If you'd like to add to animation, click the back icon next to your hair. Then click the plus icon and choose your new action. Then customize it as needed. Okay, presets. You can save actions for use across your site with presets. This helps to increase consistency and branding across your site. To save an action preset, click the Save as Preset bookmark icon next to the action's name. Then you can search for existing presets from the left-hand Interactions Manager panel. Okay, this is very useful, so you can reuse our animations. Action properties. When you choose either a custom or predefined action, you can customize how you want that action to appear within the animation. For instance, you can make a heading slide in from the left of the viewport and decrease in opacity once it hits the middle of the screen. You could also change the background of an element while rotating it on the x-axis. Okay, there are three main types of action properties. Transform changes the size, shape, location, or opacity of an element. Style changes the background, border text, or display type of an element. Class adds, removes, or toggles a class on an element. Duration, the total time of an action. Starting point, at which time of the timeline the animation starts. Easing sets the relative acceleration and deceleration of an action. Without easing, actions start, play, and end at the same speed. Yeah, we're gonna use easing on every animation. It just looks better. Staggered motion, whether target elements animate together. The total time from first to last element, or whether there is a delay between each target element's actions. Yeah, this is very interesting as well. We're gonna use it a lot. Repetition, how many times the action repeats. You can define a precise number of repetitions, set it to infinite, or repeat in a back and forth manner. Okay, to set values for both beginning and ending of an action, use the type option. You can set initial element values from when from is selected, then set final statements values to select. Yeah, we have always checked the from because mostly we need a from value and then to value to make the animation. Animations. Animations are actions involving a visual transition movement of the target element. They're built with a timeline that contains one or more twins. A twin changes a property like opacity or position over time. How to use split text? Split text option lets you break the text elements into individual words, lines, or characters for staggered animations. For instance, if you like each letter of an H1 to slide in on animation, split text allows you to do that without having to break each letter into a separate element. Okay, I already tried it. It's cool. FAQ. Why won't my element move on the canvas? If you're trying to set an action on an element, but it's not moving, you may have the element set to inline. Inline elements don't work with transform actions. Okay, this is important, I didn't know that. If you're trying to set an action on an element, but it's not moving, you may have the element set to inline. Inline elements don't work with transform actions. Okay, why isn't split text working on my elements? Balance and justified text may not work with some split text configurations. This is due to the way browsers handle inline block elements. So basically we have to be careful with the inline block elements. Why is my animation jumpy? Avoid combining CSS transitions with GSAP animations on the same element. Also, we recommend using transforms and opacity over layout properties such as width or height. Okay, they recommend using transforms and opacity over layout properties such as width or height. Okay, so we better use transform and opacity than changing the width and height. And we shouldn't combine the CSS transitions with the GSAP animations. Why aren't my 3D animations working? Make sure the animated elements are inside a container with perspective applied. Okay. Can I use CSS transitions and interactions together? We don't recommend you use CSS transitions and interactions together because they may conflict when animating. Okay, this is very useful to know. And is there something interesting left? The triggers is important as well. Triggers, we already know it. Trigger types include click, hover, page load, scroll, custom event. How to create a trigger. Click the back button next to the action's name. Click the existing trigger or click the plus icon to add a new trigger. Set your trigger settings. To create a trigger target, click the default trigger name to open the target settings. Choose your target. Adjust your target scope as needed. Okay. Triggers, targets, actions. I think we already did this. Well, there is an anatomy of an interaction. This will be interesting. Let's go through it real quick. Webflow interaction with GSAP let you create smooth, responsive interactions for your site. You can reuse animations and precisely control timing, sequencing, and responsiveness using a visual timeline. That's very cool. Interactions. Interactions are sequences built with 4 key parts: triggers, targets, actions, and animations. Trigger type: click, hover, page load, etc. Trigger target: the element or elements the trigger acts upon. Action: a reaction to a trigger. Action target: the element or elements that are affected by the action. Animation: a type of action where properties change over time. When a site visitor interacts with your site, a trigger detects that event and starts an interaction. The interaction performs one or more actions. which affect one or more targets. Some actions are simple, like adding or removing classes or modifying an element's styles or attributes, and others involve visually complex time changes, like animation. As you build interactions in the Interactions panel, they appear on the timeline, a visual tool that sequences multiple actions and animations. Here we can see the anatomy of an interaction. Let's see. Perform an action, set a variable value, play, arrive state machine, run custom code. First there is a trigger, page load or scroll, hover, etc. Then we perform an action. And to perform a trigger, we need a trigger target, trigger specific properties, and then we perform an action. We have an action target and action properties. Uh, we need to make an action play animation and the animation properties. Perform an action, action target, action properties. Perform an action, visual transition tween, action target, and properties. Okay, an interaction is a trigger plus one or more actions, which may include animations. You can name interactions by clicking its name from the interactions panel when you're editing the interaction. All interactions are available from left-hand Interactions Manager panel. Note that this panel only includes interactions created using GSAP. Okay, we won't be able to see the classic interactions. Triggers. Triggers detect user or system events that then start an action. You can use triggers like mouse clicks, mouse hover, custom events. You can adjust the trigger's target scope, and other settings depending on the trigger you choose. Interactions can also have multiple triggers. For example, you can set a trigger to fire or mouse enter. On mouse enter, play the timeline, and then another trigger to fire on mouse leave. Reverse the timeline. Targets. In an interaction, you have trigger targets and action targets. In an interaction, you have trigger targets and action targets. You can target by element ID, class, attribute, the element that initiated the interaction. After setting your target, adjust the scope as needed. Okay, actions. Actions are reactions to a trigger and have targets that they are acting upon. For instance, actions can include playing an animation, modifying a target style or structure. You can configure actions to run in sequence or in parallel. Some actions are instant, like adding a class, while others are animated on a timeline. Presets. You can have actions as presets to reuse across your site, helping maintain visual consistency and brand identify. To save an action preset, click the Save as Preset bookmark icon next to the action's name. Then you can search for existing presets from the left-hand Interaction Manager panel. Animations. Animations are actions involving a visual transition movement of the target element. They are built with a timeline that contains one or more twins. A twin changes a property like opacity or position over time. Okay, amazing. We know a lot about the triggers, targets, actions, and animations now. This intro we already went through. Getting started with GSAP in Webflow. Let's see. As of April 30, 2025, all GSAP features, including the core library and previously paid plugins, are natively supported via the GSAP library. This makes it easier than ever for you to build motion-rich experiences on your site with minimal setup. Since GSAP animations are supported in Webflow, they don't require external file hosting. Amazing. Important. We've introduced Webflow interactions with GSAP, designed to help you create smooth, performant, reusable animations directly on Webflow's visual canvas without extra tools or plugins. How to enable GSAP on your Webflow site. Go to your site in Webflow, go to Settings panel, click GSAP integration, toggle the GSAP library on, use checkboxes to enable plugins. If you have a workspace or site plan that allows you to add custom code to your site, you can also load the GSAP library at plugins from Webflow's CDN. Once enabled, you can begin writing GSAP-powered animations and page settings, custom code, before body tag or using script tags inside embed components. How to set up a custom code for configuring animations with GSAP. Important. Okay. The support team won't be answering if we have a problem with the custom code. Your custom code will look something like this. Script, window, add event listener. Okay. Okay. Check system motion settings. Okay, why Webflow prioritize our visitor preference. Okay, so for the accessibility, we should make our animations to be okay. This is important. Reduced motion operating system on or browser settings only affects smooth scroll behavior on published sites. Site previews will still show smooth scroll animation, even if reduced motion has been selected as a user preference. Okay, so we have to do reduce motion for people that check the reduce motion in their accessibility preferences. Okay, I think that's it with the documentation, guys. It was a very big documentation on the GSAP. We learned a lot. I will play like one more day with the GSAP, and then I plan to start learning a little bit about the CMS. And after I study CMS for like 2 or 3 days, I will then start the building with the client first, a whole website, or dissect a template that was built on client first. We'll start building. I think we have the foundations now. I only need the CMS now to cover the basic CMS fundamentals, at least to know how it's used, the best principles, why it's used, and then I think I'll be ready to start building some basic websites, and maybe after 2 or 3 weeks make my Upwork and try to find um, a beginner Webflow job if somebody gives me a chance. I think I will be ready to pick something very easy. I'm motivated. I'm pretty sure I will be able to do it. I'm just not sure about the time frame because I will try to deliver a best possible product to everyone who hires me. And I'm pretty sure I'll be able to do it, but I don't know about the time. Maybe it will take me a lot of time because I'll have to learn a lot of things. So, this is for me for today, guys. Thank you for watching. See ya tomorrow. Bye bye.